Hey guys, tonight we drift to a quiet shoreline, somewhere you can almost feel beneath your toes. The soft crunch of pebbles, the wash of waves curling in and out like someone sighing in their sleep. The air tastes of salt, a little tangy, with gulls crying overhead. You find yourself walking along this coast at twilight, the kind where the horizon is bruised purple and gold, and there's just enough light left to see a figure wandering near the waterline. He doesn't move with the uncertain shuffle of a fisherman hauling nets or the proud stride of a soldier. No, this one wobbles, like someone who's been enjoying more than his fair share of wine. His robe is slightly skewed, his hair is wild, and in his hand he loosely cradles a cup that never seems to empty. That's your first hint that you're not just looking at some ordinary guy who had a bit too much at the taverna, because this, as you'll come to realize, is Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, madness, and, strangely enough, theatre. The Greeks often described him as having that mischievous twinkle in his eye, the kind that says, "I'm about to start some chaos, but you'll probably laugh while it happens." And here he is, alone, walking the coast, barefoot, mumbling to himself, apparently looking for trouble, or maybe waiting for it to find him. You probably won't survive this, by the way. If you actually encountered an unpredictable god who liked to blur the line between joy and destruction, you'd either end up in a festival that lasted 3 weeks straight, or you'd find yourself transformed into something you didn't sign up for. But that's the comfort of myth. You get to watch safely from the shoreline, sipping your own imaginary glass, while the story unfolds. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? It's always fun to imagine this same myth being heard in Tokyo at sunrise, in Chicago at midnight, or somewhere on the African coast as the evening breeze comes in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge closer, as if pulled by the curiosity that makes you follow odd strangers on beaches in bedtime stories. Dionysus turns, catching your eye. For a second, you think he knows exactly what you're thinking, that he's drunk, lost, maybe harmless. But then the corners of his mouth twitch, and you realize this isn't clumsiness at all. This is theatre, and you're watching the god of performance put on his opening act. The Greeks like to describe Dionysus as a god who lived between boundaries, between sanity and madness, between civilization and wilderness, between joy and danger. In fact, one mainstream historical fact is that in Athens, festivals held in his honor eventually gave birth to formal theatre. Imagine rows of spectators watching plays under the sun, all because this stumbling figure on the beach symbolized the breaking of rules, the slipping of masks, the laughter that turned into drama. Without him, Shakespeare might have had to take up beekeeping instead. But tonight's tale isn't about stage curtains or sonnets. Tonight, it's about how Dionysus ends up on a ship with sailors who think they're cleverer than a god. You can already sense the setup. Trickster god plus greedy mortals equals someone's going to regret their choices. The quirky tidbit here, ancient sailors often carried charms of dolphins on their ships, believing the animals to be good luck and rescuers of drowning men, which makes what's about to happen wonderfully ironic. You trail along the beach as Dionysus finally sits on a rock, staring out at the horizon, cup still full, even though you've seen him sip from it more than once. The wind is cool, brushing your face, and the sea feels unusually alive, as if it's whispering, "Pay attention, something's coming." In myths, the sea is rarely just a backdrop. It's a stage prop that can sing, sulk, or swallow. Historians still argue whether this story of Dionysus wandering the coast is based on older fertility rituals, seafaring superstitions, or maybe just a creative excuse to explain why dolphins act so strangely playful. Some suggest the myth is an allegory about not underestimating foreigners, since Greek culture often warned against mocking strangers. You never knew when one might be a disguised deity. Others think it was simply told because it was funny. Picture it, rowdy sailors about to kidnap someone, and that victim turns out to be the god of chaotic payback. That's basically the ancient equivalent of trying to scam someone online, only to find out they're an undercover cop. As the tide crawls closer to his feet, Dionysus hums to himself, some melody that doesn't belong to this world. A rhythm that makes your eyelids feel heavier. He tips his cup toward you in a silent toast. You don't know if you're supposed to drink, bow, or run, but it hardly matters, because soon, The sound of voices carries from the horizon. Rough laughter, shouts, and the creak of oars dipping into the sea. A ship is approaching, full of men whose eyes gleam not with wonder, but with greed. For now, you sit with Dionysus in the fading light, waiting. You smell tar and pine pitch from the ship's hull as it glides nearer, and the god beside you gives no sign of fear. He only sips again, watching the waves break. Somewhere in the distance, a dolphin leaps, its slick body arching through the sunset, as if foreshadowing the strangest case of mistaken identity in Greek myth. The ship glides closer, its oars dipping in and out of the water, with the precision of men who have done this for years. The vessel itself is a typical merchant galley, narrow, long, and hungry for profit. You notice its hull is patched in places with tar that smells sharp in the evening air. Ropes creak, a sail flaps lazily, and on deck, a group of sailors lean over the railing, pointing and muttering at the sight of Dionysus sitting casually on his seaside rock. You're close enough now to catch snatches of their talk. One sailor squints and says, "That's no commoner. Look at the robe, look at his skin. Soft, like he's never worked a day." Another chuckles. "He's some prince on the run. Maybe from Lydia, maybe from Thrace. Doesn't matter. He's worth something. Grab him, and we'll make a fortune." Their captain strokes his beard and nods with that kind of greedy authority you recognize instantly. This man's entire career depends on sniffing out opportunities, and right now he smells profit. You glance at Dionysus to see if he's alarmed, but no, he's smirking. He even raises his cup to the approaching ship, as if to toast his would-be kidnappers. The sailors, too busy plotting, don't seem to notice. The gangplank thumps onto the pebbly beach, and rough hands grab the god under his arms. To you, it looks almost comical. They expect resistance, but Dionysus goes along cheerfully, as though being kidnapped is part of his evening entertainment. He stumbles on purpose once or twice, making them laugh at his clumsiness. His wine cup, miraculously, never spills. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. In many coastal Greek towns, kidnapping for ransom was disturbingly normal. Wealthy travelers, especially foreigners, were prime targets. Ancient inscriptions mention ransoms paid in silver, grain, or even entire shipments of olive oil. The line between sailor, trader, and pirate was thinner than the plank Dionysus just walked across. Once on deck, the sailors tie him loosely with ropes. You can tell their knots are half-hearted. They're not worried about him escaping. He's just one man after all. They shove him down near the mast, still chuckling, still talking about how much gold they'll fetch once they reach port. "We'll claim he's a runaway noble," the captain says, "and his family will pay dearly to get him back." But you notice something odd. Even bound, Dionysus sits straight, eyes shining in the lamplight. He hums again, that same off-world tune, and the ropes almost seem to loosen themselves. The sailors don't notice. They're too busy dreaming about the silver coins already rattling in their purses. The quirky tidbit here. Ancient Greeks actually believed that Dionysus often traveled disguised as a mortal youth, wandering from town to town, testing whether people would offer him hospitality. Fail the test by mocking or harming him, and chaos followed. Pass the test by offering him food, drink, or shelter, and blessings poured out like endless wine. This myth of the talking dolphins is just one of those pop quizzes the god liked to spring on mortals. You lean against the ship's railing, feeling it push away from the shore, the waves slapping against the hull in rhythmic applause. Stars prick the sky one by one. The sailors hoist the sail and laugh about their upcoming riches. One of them even jokes, maybe he's not a prince, maybe he's a god. The others roar with laughter, shaking their heads at such foolishness. If only they knew. Historians still argue whether this specific myth was meant as a warning to sailors, don't mistreat strangers at sea, or whether it was a story born in vineyard country, where grape harvesters wanted a colourful tale about their patron god. Some even think it may have originated as a ritual chant, performed during festivals when wine flowed and participants pretended to be transformed into animals. That possibility, That hazy overlap between myth and performance feels strangely fitting for Dionysus, who blurred every boundary he touched. You can smell the salt spray now, colder as the ship heads into deeper water. The ropes holding Dionysus look thinner by the minute, as if the fibers themselves are afraid of what they've been asked to do. The sailors, blind to all this, start singing a bawdy tune about tavern girls in Corinth. Their laughter echoes across the waves. You glance again at the god. He's smiling, not at the sailors, but at you, as if to say, just wait, the show hasn't even started yet. And in the pit of your stomach, you feel it. Something's coming. Not a storm, not a pirate attack, something stranger. The air itself tastes charged, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. The sailors think they've trapped a victim. What they've really done is invite a god on board, and you know, enough by now to realize that never ends the way mortals expect. The ropes creak faintly as the ship slides deeper into the open water, but Dionysus doesn't even shift uncomfortably. He sits at the base of the mast like he's in the best seat at a comedy show, knees drawn up, cup still somehow in hand, face tilted toward the stars. Every so often he chuckles softly, as if he's privy to a joke you and the sailors haven't yet heard. You watch the crew buzzing around. One sailor tightens the rigging, another coils rope, while two more argue about how many drachmas they'll demand as ransom. Their voices rise over the slap of waves. He's worth at least 100, says one. Maybe 2, says another. The captain, always eager to appear wiser, shakes his head. More. We'll say he's royal. A runaway noble from the east. His father will pay 10 times that. The men laugh, greedy teeth flashing. Dionysus hums again, a tune so lilting and calm it feels out of place on a pirate ship. His eyes catch yours, and for a moment you swear you see galaxies spinning in them. He wiggles slightly, and the ropes around his wrists sag. Not untied, not snapped, just sagged, as though the fibers have grown weary of holding him. He doesn't slip free though. He simply sits, bound but unbothered, like an actor waiting for his cue. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Greek practice of xenia, or guest friendship, was taken very seriously. If a stranger appeared at your home, you were supposed to feed them, give them water, even a place to sleep before asking who they were. Violating this hospitality wasn't just rude, it was dangerous, because gods were thought to disguise themselves as wanderers to test mortals. Zeus himself was the protector of guests, but Dionysus, more playful and unpredictable, also loved playing this game. The sailors, blinded by greed, are about to fail that test spectacularly. One of the younger crewmen, perhaps less hardened than the rest, sidles over and whispers, "You look too calm for someone tied up." His eyes narrow, suspicion flickering. But before he can ask more, the captain barks, "Quit wasting time! Keep an eye on the rigging." The youth obeys, though he glances back at Dionysus twice, unsettled. You file this away. There's always one person in the story who senses trouble first. The quirky tidbit? Ancient vase paintings actually show Dionysus on a ship, surrounded by dolphins. In some versions, he isn't bound at all. He simply sits at ease while everything magical unfolds. These images suggest the myth was popular enough to decorate drinking cups, which feels wonderfully meta. You'd be sipping wine from a cup that showed Dionysus making wine spill across a ship. That's the kind of inside joke the Greeks adored. Meanwhile, Dionysus plays along. He tilts his head toward the sailors, pretending to listen as they scheme. One brags that he'll buy a new cloak with his share of the ransom. Another says he'll drink so much wine he won't remember his own name. Dionysus chuckles at that, which makes the man frown. "What's so funny, prisoner?" he demands. Dionysus just shrugs, eyes twinkling. You'll see. Historians still argue whether the sailor's greed was meant as a broader moral lesson or simply comic setup. Some scholars think this myth is satire, a bunch of fools so blinded by profit they don't realize they've literally captured a god. Others think it may echo real anxieties of ancient seafarers. After all, the sea was unpredictable, and offending the wrong power could spell disaster. By wrapping the fear in humor, storytellers made the message easier to swallow. Don't underestimate the sea, or the strangers who wander its shores. The night deepens. Stars sprinkle brighter overhead, and the sea looks like polished obsidian. The ship creaks as though it too feels uneasy. You lean on the railing, breathing in salt and tar, watching Dionysus hum and smile. There's a softness in the air, a lull before something tips. The sailors remain oblivious, cracking jokes, trading boasts, convinced they're in control. But you know better. Every second the god pretends to be their prisoner, the suspense coils tighter. You can practically hear the stage directions whispering, hold, hold, and then release. And Dionysus, sipping from his never-empty cup, is very, very good at waiting for the perfect release. The ship cuts steadily across the dark water, its sail catching a mild breeze. But you start to notice something odd about the air. It isn't steady. The gusts come and go like laughter, unpredictable and sly, pushing the vessel one way and then the other. The sailors grumble, tugging at ropes, cursing the wind as though it's a mischievous child. You, of course, know better. Dionysus sits at the mast with that same lazy posture, ropes barely clinging to him, cup balanced in his hand. He hums a tune you can't quite recognize, yet the melody slips into your bones like a lullaby and a dare at the same time. Each note seems to ruffle the sails, each hum drawing another strange gust. The sailors don't catch on. "South wind's playing tricks," the captain mutters, gripping the tiller. "We'll adjust." His crew nods, moving with the easy practice of men who've fought seas before. But you feel the difference. This isn't weather. This is theatre. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. The ancient Greeks genuinely believed winds had personalities. They named them Boreas, the cold north wind; Zephyrus, the gentle west wind; Notus, the damp south wind. Sailors would leave offerings to these forces, begging for cooperation. The Aegean was notorious for sudden squalls, so attributing moods to the breeze made sense. In a way, blaming the wind was safer than admitting you'd made a mistake. Tonight, though, there's no question of mistake. The wind is laughing, darting, teasing, as if it's in on Dionysus's joke. One rope snaps loose with a sudden crack, startling a sailor into dropping his coil. Another gust swirls a spray of seawater over the deck, soaking boots and tempers alike. "By Poseidon's beard," one curses, wringing out his tunic. The others laugh at him, unaware that the sea is only beginning its tricks. The quirky tidbit. In some variations of this myth, the sea actually plays music as Dionysus is carried off. Yes, music. Waves keeping rhythm, wind whistling like flutes. The idea might sound absurd, but for the Greeks, natural sounds were never just background noise. They could be omens, hints, or secret performances staged by gods. Imagine a shipload of rough sailors hearing the sea whistle a tune and not realizing they were part of a divine concert. Historians still argue whether these embellishments, the laughing wind, the singing sea, were original to the myth or later flourishes by poets who wanted to dress up the tale. Some even suspect it was tied to early ritual theatre, where performers used sound effects to mimic the sea. If true, then you're not just hearing a bedtime story. You're sitting in the audience of the oldest immersive play ever staged. The ship pitches slightly, enough to make mugs clatter against planks. One sailor mutters a prayer under his breath. Another spits over the side, a charm against bad luck. The captain growls, "Hold steady, it's only a breeze." His voice is steady, but his eyes flick nervously toward the horizon, where clouds seem to swell, though no storm is brewing. You glance at Dionysus again. His smile has widened. He hasn't moved an inch, hasn't strained against his ropes, but it feels like the entire sea bends to his amusement. He tilts his cup, and though you're too far to see clearly, you swear the liquid inside ripples in rhythm with the gusts. A toast to the wind, perhaps? Or a warning? The sailors try to laugh it off. One shouts, "Let the wind have its fun! It won't stop us!" The others cheer, banging fists against barrels, playing bravado against unease. But you can feel the tension building. The stage lights are flickering, the curtains rustling, and somewhere in the orchestra pit, the instruments are tuning for the next act. And still, Dionysus hums, low and steady, as though conducting the invisible forces that toy with the ship. The sailors steady the rigging, grumbling about the fickle winds, when something even stranger begins to happen. You notice it first. A damp patch spreading across the planks near Dionysus's bound feet. At first you assume it's seawater, but the colour is wrong. Darker, richer, with a sweetness that hits your nose like a vineyard on a summer afternoon. It's wine. Thick, red rivulets trickle between the deckboards, staining the wood. The sailors shout in alarm, scrambling backward, eyes wide as they watch liquid gush from nowhere, bubbling like a spring. One man drops to his knees and dips a finger in. He sniffs, then licks it cautiously. His eyes widen. "By the gods," he stammers, "it's wine." The smell rolls across the ship, heady and intoxicating. Grapes crushed underfoot, fermentation in cool clay jars, the sting of alcohol warming your chest. It's all here, stronger than any cargo hold could contain. And yet you know the ship isn't carrying a single amphora. This is not cargo. This is performance. A mainstream historical fact. The Greeks stored their wine in clay amphorae sealed with resin. They mixed it with water before drinking, since straight wine was considered barbaric. Festivals in honor of Dionysus often included competitions to see who could drink the most, or sing the longest while drinking. Some inscriptions even show winners proudly boasting of downing 10 cups without collapsing. If those champions could see this ship now, they'd be on their knees, scooping up the endless supply with both hands. The crew doesn't know what to make of it. Some laugh nervously, cupping wine from the deck, gulping greedily. Others shout that it's sorcery. The captain bellows for order, but his voice cracks halfway through, betraying his fear. A few sailors slosh across the slippery planks, trying to plug the leak, only to realize there's no source. The wine just is, as natural as the sea. And Dionysus, he watches calmly, still bound, still holding his own cup that never empties. He raises it slightly, as if in salute, and takes a leisurely sip. You can't help but smirk. This is the god of wine. What else did they expect him to conjure? The quirky tidbit. Some ancient commentators joked that Dionysus could turn seawater into wine, much like a divine vintner running the world's strangest tavern. Others claimed the miracle symbolized how wine connects land and sea. Grapes growing in vineyards, shipped across waters, turning strangers into companions. On this ship, though, the miracle only deepens the panic, because the crew doesn't see companionship. They see the deck flooding with sticky red proof that they've tangled with something more than a runaway noble. Historians still argue whether this moment was always part of the myth, or if later poets added it to emphasize Dionysus' signature power. Was it an ancient crowd pleaser, like a special effect in theatre, where stagehands poured dyed water across the floor? Or was it an allegory? Greed turning to intoxication, overwhelming sailors until they stumbled into ruin. The debate continues, though tonight, sloshing through a knee-deep deck, you don't need allegory. You need a towel, the sailors argue, some scooping wine into their mouths like children at a fountain, others crossing themselves with charms against witchcraft. "Throw him overboard!" one shouts, finger shaking at Dionysus, but another, swaying already from the fumes, slurs, No, he's a blessing! A divine guest." He stumbles, laughing, and falls flat, face first into the wine. The captain tries again to bark orders, but his boots slip on the slick planks, sending him sprawling. His men howl with laughter, the sound hysterical and thin. The sea joins in with a slap of waves against the hull. Even the rigging seems to groan with mirth, and Dionysus, he chuckles. Low, rich, utterly certain, he doesn't move to escape the ropes. He doesn't need to. The ship is already his stage, and the audience, drunk, terrified, bewildered, is hooked. The smell of the wine thickens, overwhelming. You taste it on your tongue just from the air. The stars overhead blur slightly, as though the sky itself is tipsy. The sailors stumble, laugh, curse, shout. Their dreams of ransom are gone. They are actors now, unwilling, caught in a divine comedy they cannot direct. The hum grows louder, winding through the rigging like a breeze. At first it sounds like a simple sailor's tune. Low, rhythmic, the kind of thing sung to keep oars in time. But then the melody shifts, weaving in notes that don't belong on mortal lips. The pitch wavers, lilts, rises higher than the human voice should, then plunges low enough to vibrate the boards beneath your feet. The sailors stop laughing. They freeze, wine dripping from their clothes, eyes darting about like cornered animals. The sound prickles their skin, draws their spines rigid. A few try to shout, but their voices die in their throats. Then you see it. Vines. Thin, green tendrils snake from between the deck planks, curling toward the mast, where Dionysus sits bound. Leaves unfurl with a papery crackle. Clusters of grapes appear, impossibly ripe, swelling and darkening before your eyes. The air thickens with their perfume. The sailors stagger back, clutching weapons uselessly. One slashes at a vine with his dagger. The blade cuts through easily, but the severed pieces twitch, coil, and knit themselves back together, crawling toward the mast again. The quirky tidbit. Greek audiences loved plant miracles on stage. In some plays, hidden mechanisms would lower baskets of fruit or release petals from above to mimic divine gifts. Scholars still debate how such effects were pulled off in open-air theatres. Were real vines dragged in from behind the scenery? Did stagehands sprinkle rose petals in secret? Whatever the tricks, audiences delighted in watching the impossible sprout before their eyes. But this isn't a trick. The vines climb faster, wrapping the mast, binding Dionysus even tighter. But he doesn't struggle. He tilts his head back, eyes closed, as though basking in sunlight only he can feel. His lips move, and the ship groans in reply. The captain, sweating, makes a last attempt at courage. "Cut him down!" he shouts. "Before the whole ship is cursed!" Two men lunge forward, blades raised, but the vines lash out, wrapping their wrists, yanking weapons away. One man cries out as he's pulled backward, crashing into a coil of rope. The other stumbles into the spreading grapes, which burst underfoot, staining him red as though with blood. He shrieks and scrambles away. The vines keep climbing. They crawl up the rigging, burst through the sails, dangle heavy with fruit. Birds appear, doves and owls flapping from nowhere, settling onto the branches, as if the mast has turned into a forest. A mainstream historical fact, Dionysus wasn't just the god of wine, he was also patron of theatre. Festivals in his honor, called Dionysia, were the birthplace of Greek drama. Tragedy and comedy both grew from performances dedicated to him. Scholars point out that the vines on stage mirrored not just his link to wine, but to art itself. Wild, growing, unstoppable. Watching this deck transform into a green living theatre, you begin to understand why. The sailors don't. They panic. One shouts prayers to Poseidon. Another tries to climb the railing, only to be whipped back by a vine. Their unity dissolves into chaos. Drunk, terrified, slipping on the wine-slick deck, they are no longer crew. They are audience, unwilling, but rapt. The quirky tidbit. In Roman times, artists often painted Dionysus with ivy rather than grapevines. Since ivy was evergreen and symbolized eternal life, some even believed ivy could prevent drunkenness if chewed before drinking. Ironically, on this ship, no leaf prevents the dizziness. The sailors sway as if the very air is fermented. Dionysus finally opens his eyes. They gleam gold in the starlight. His voice rolls over the deck, deeper than thunder, sweeter than song. "You thought me a prize," he says softly, "but you are the prize. You wished for riches, then drink your fill. Let the vines bind you as greed bound your hearts." The sailors collapse, some wailing, some laughing hysterically, some too drunk on scent and fear to move. You grip the railing, trying to steady yourself. The ship creaks, vines stretching across its frame like ribs, sails fluttering under the weight of fruit. You feel you've stepped out of time, into a play staged not for mortals, but for gods. And Dionysus, bound no longer, raises his cup once more. The ship has become a jungle. Vines drape across the rigging like hammocks. Fat bunches of grapes sagging in the salty wind, leaves rustling though there's no breeze. You're caught in the surreal hush after Dionysus speaks. Like the air itself is waiting, then the hush breaks. A roar. It doesn't come from a man's throat. It's deeper, rounder, so loud it rattles the barrel hoops and makes your teeth ache. From nowhere, a lion bounds onto the deck. Its mane glows faintly, golden like molten bronze. It doesn't move like a natural beast. It moves like a symbol, every step deliberate, like an illustration come alive. Its eyes burn amber, unblinking. The sailors scatter. One climbs the rigging, another dives behind a barrel. The captain raises his sword, hand trembling, and whispers a prayer that's half plea, half curse. Then comes a second sound, lower, wetter. A bear, massive and dark, lumbers into view near the mast. Its fur glistens as though soaked, its breath steaming in thick rhythmic clouds. The deck creaks under its weight. You want to remind the sailors of a mainstream fact. The Greeks loved to tell stories of gods who conjured animals to test mortals. Zeus once sent eagles as omens. Artemis transformed a hunter into a stag for spying on her bath. But Dionysus? He's extra. Why send one beast when two will make the drama juicier? One sailor shrieks, throws a knife at the lion. It doesn't land. The blade vanishes mid-air, swallowed by illusion, or maybe by the god's will. The lion roars again, and the bear swipes a paw, splintering wood. Historians still argue whether these beasts in the myth were real transformations, or just hallucinatory visions brought on by Dionysus. Were the sailors drugged by the wine? Did the vines release intoxicating fumes? Ancient Greek texts love blurring the line between the literal and the metaphorical. Either way, on this ship, the terror feels real enough. The quirky tidbit. In medieval bestiaries, those strange illustrated animal encyclopedias, Dolphins sometimes appeared right alongside lions and bears, all in the same breathless lists of creatures of God's power. Maybe someone centuries later remembered this myth and thought, why not mix a seafaring mammal with beasts of the land? A god could make the absurd seamless. The captain makes his stand. He lunges at the bear, blade flashing. The bear doesn't bleed. It dissolves into a fog that smells like honey and pine, then reforms right behind him. The captain stumbles, nearly topples overboard. The lion prowls closer, teeth bared, growl vibrating through the wood. Enough! Dionysus' voice cuts across the panic. His laugh follows, not cruel, but sharp with irony. You wanted a prize. Here is your prize. The play you star in. The beasts roar in unison. The sailors, in total disarray, scream and scatter again. Some fall to their knees, begging. Others grip their heads as if trying to wake from a nightmare. You think of Greek theatre again. Actors wore masks of exaggerated emotion, so even those in the farthest seats could read fear, joy, despair. On this deck, no mask is needed. The sailors' faces are theatre incarnate. One sailor edges toward the railing, too panicked to think. I'll take my chances in the sea, he cries. Before anyone can stop him, he leaps overboard, splashing into the black waves. The lion turns its gaze toward the others, pupils like molten suns. The bear huffs, shaking the deck with its bulk. The ship is no longer just a vessel. It's a stage, a trap, and a lesson rolled into one. You're pressed against the rail, watching it all unfold, half terrified, half fascinated. Part of you knows this is myth unfolding before your eyes, and you, poor mortal, have a front row seat. The lion growls once more, and the vines shudder as though applauding. The sea heaves with a long sigh, and the ship tilts hard to port. You grab the railing, knuckles whitening, while the sailors careen like dice in a shaken cup. The lion and bear still pace the deck, eyes glowing, but now the men realize there's no safety left on wood or rope. One sailor, eyes wide, hair plastered to his sweat-shiny forehead, shouts, "To the water!" Better Poseidon than this madness. His voice cracks on the word madness, like even saying it betrays his courage, and then it happens. The first leap. He scrambles over the railing and dives into the waves. You expect a splash, arms flailing, a man fighting for air. Instead, you see something uncanny. His form twists mid-fall, limbs warping, skin slickening, a shimmer of silver grey catching the moonlight. By the time he hits the water, he's no man at all. He's a dolphin, sleek and rolling, squeaking out confusion in a high, eerie whistle. The others gape. One sailor rubs his eyes furiously, as if hoping to blink away a nightmare. But the next moment, another jumps. And another. Panic spreads like spilled oil. They leap in clusters now, tripping over barrels, pushing each other aside, driven by raw fear. The deck echoes with their cries. Some desperate prayers to Zeus, others blasphemies against gods, others incoherent babble. You catch one sailor mutter something about the Tyrrhenian pirates, a fragment of an older tale, because some versions of this myth insist they were not innocent sailors at all, but kidnappers trying to ransom Dionysus. Historians still argue whether this version was invented later as moral spin. Of course they were punished. They weren't ordinary men, they were pirates. But here, whether pirate or fisherman, the terror is the same. The quirky detail, dolphins, despite their reputation as friendly sea creatures today, weren't always seen that way in antiquity. Some ancient writers thought dolphins were half-spirits, liminal beings between man and beast, carrying drowned souls on their backs. So when the sailors leap, their transformation isn't just punishment, it's exile into a twilight category, forever half-human, half-animal. Splash after splash follows. You watch bodies twist, their arms stiffening into fins, legs binding into tails, mouths gape, teeth vanish, replaced by dolphin grins. It's surreal and strangely graceful, like a ballet choreographed by the sea. The water froths with new shapes, fins cutting through the waves like quicksilver blades. Dionysus leans against the mast, utterly calm. A faint smile curls his lips as he observes his impromptu performance. The lion and bear dissolve back into mist, leaving only the god, the vines, and the smell of salt wine. The last sailor hesitates. He clings to the mast, eyes wild. "Mercy, Lord," he croaks. "I meant no harm." Dionysus doesn't reply, but his eyes gleam. For a moment, you think the god might spare him. Then the mast itself creaks. wrapped in ivy, and the sailor loses his grip. He topples backward into the sea with a scream that cuts off mid-note, replaced by the whistle of another dolphin. Silence. Only the slosh of waves, the squeak of dolphins circling the ship, their slick bodies reflecting starlight. You lean over the rail, and they look back at you with eyes still strangely human. Recognition flickering before fading into instinct. It's haunting, but it's also oddly soothing. The frenzy has ended, replaced by rhythm. The dolphins surfacing, diving, blowing mist from their blowholes in slow, steady pulses. It's like a new choir has been born, singing a sea song only gods understand. You shiver, not from cold, from the realization you've just seen a transformation myth come alive. And whether punishment or blessing, those sailors will never tread on land again. The sea is suddenly crowded with motion. Where a ragged crew once scrambled across planks and rigging, a pod of dolphins now circles the ship. Their sleek bodies arc through moonlit waves, fins slicing the water with a rhythm both playful and eerie. You lean over the railing, eyes tracking the shimmer of silver-grey hides, and for a fleeting second, you swear you recognize faces in those dolphin eyes. Wide with shock, still very human in their confusion, they squeak and click, the air filled with a chorus of high-pitched sounds. To modern ears it's charming, but here it feels uncanny, like voices warped into another register. You imagine the sailors, no, the dolphins, trying to call out, trying to explain their terror, and yet all that escapes them is song. One breaks the surface close to the ship, exhaling a misty plume. It's almost comical, like a man sneezing wine out his nose, but the effect makes your skin crawl. Another rolls on its side, eye fixed directly on you, and you feel a shiver of recognition. Is that the captain, or the boy who'd sung a work song just an hour before? A mainstream fact floats to mind. The Greeks admired dolphins enough to carve them into coins and pottery. They believed dolphins were guides for souls, carrying the dead safely across waters. Even today, statues in Delos and Corinth show dolphins wrapped around Apollo or carrying little Eros on their backs. To leap into the sea and become one was both curse and strange honor. And yet, the quirky tidbit here is darker. Some ancient sources claim dolphins were once men who insulted the gods, always trapped between human memory and animal form. You might say the sailors were folded into a long-running legend, joining a fraternity of punished seafarers. A mythological alumni club no one asked to join. Historians still argue whether the transformation in this story was literal in the eyes of its first listeners. Was it a divine miracle that audiences believed could happen to any disrespectful sailor? Or was it symbolic? An allegory for piracy, showing how greed strips men of humanity, leaving them only animal cunning. The debate goes in circles, not unlike the dolphins themselves. On the waves, the creatures' movements turn rhythmic. They leap in arcs, then dive in unison, tails slapping the surface like applause. At first it's eerie, but the longer you watch, the more soothing it becomes. Their sleek bodies rise and fall like metronomes for the sea, marking a tempo that lulls your heartbeat into calm. You even chuckle at the thought. If you had to be punished by a god, becoming a dolphin isn't the worst outcome. Free swimming, plenty of fish, no taxes, no rent. The only downside? You lose the ability to complain. And let's be honest, complaining is half the fun of being human. Dionysus, still leaning on the mast draped in ivy, watches quietly. The glow in his eyes fades to something softer, almost wistful. He raises a hand, not to command but to bless. The dolphins squeal louder, circling closer to the ship, as if acknowledging their new bond to the god. And then the sea settles. No storm, no roar, no beasts. Just the slap of gentle waves against the hull, and the chorus of dolphins fading into distance. You realize the play has ended. The performance closed with a curtain call of splashing fins. The ship, though battered and overgrown with ivy, still floats. And you, standing on its deck, realize you've survived a god's theatre. An audience member spared, a witness to myth etched across water. The dolphins leap once more in unison, tails flashing like silver lanterns, before vanishing into the vast, dark sea. The sea lies calm now, as if it had never been roused at all. The vines still curl lazily around the mast, heavy with grapes, leaves whispering in a phantom breeze. The dolphins are gone, their splashes faded into distant echoes. All that remains is you, the ship creaking in rhythm with the waves, and Dionysus standing tall at the center of it all. You've seen him this whole time in a mortal disguise. just a slender youth with dark curls and eyes that twinkled too knowingly. But now, as the silence stretches, the disguise drops away. The ropes that once bound him unravel like water slipping through fingers, falling in neat coils onto the deck. He stretches his arms, and the air seems to shimmer. The god reveals himself. His form glows, not like a lantern, not like fire, but like wine held up to the light, a warm ruby radiance from within. His skin has the hue of late harvest grapes. His hair spills in waves of deep black with threads of ivy curling through it. His eyes, when they meet yours, are endless, equal parts mirth and menace, the look of someone who has tasted every joy and every grief and can't decide which one is funnier. You stumble back instinctively because you realize you've been standing in the presence of more than a trickster all along. This is Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, theatre, and divine madness, a god whose followers ran wild in forests, wearing fawn skins, beating drums, tearing reality as easily as they tore ivy leaves. A mainstream fact: Dionysus wasn't always welcomed in the Greek pantheon. Some myths say he was born twice, hidden from Hera's wrath, stitched into Zeus's thigh after his mortal mother burned away. His identity was always slippery, half outsider, half insider, straddling mortal and divine. Historians still argue whether the Dolphins story itself was part of early cult propaganda, meant to show how Dionysus punished non-believers who mocked him. It's a divine calling card. Disrespect me, and I'll rewrite your life into an animal fable. The quirky tidbit. In some vase paintings of this myth, Dionysus is oddly serene, even dainty. While lions roar and dolphins leap, the god himself just reclines with a wine cup, chilling like it's a lazy Sunday picnic. Imagine being so powerful you don't even need to pose dramatically. You let the chaos sell itself. On the deck, you feel the glow from his body warm your skin. The scent of crushed grapes lingers, mixed with salt air. His voice, when he finally speaks, is both intimate and booming, as if it fills your head and the horizon at once. Mortals forget, he says, that every stranger might be a god. You saw what happens when men trade kindness for greed. You nod weakly, though no answer is expected. It's like nodding at thunder, pure reflex. The god gestures toward the waves. A few dolphins linger still, bobbing in the distance, squeaking softly, as if to say they understand nothing but must live with everything. Dionysus doesn't curse them further, nor does he bless them outright. He simply lets them exist, half punishment, half curious mercy, and then his eyes flick to you. For a heartbeat, your stomach knots. You think, what if he decides I saw too much? What if he turns me into something worse? A jellyfish, a seagull, maybe even a wine stain on the deck. Instead, he laughs, not cruelly, warmly, richly. The laugh of someone who's heard every joke before and still finds them funny. It rolls through the rigging, makes the vines rustle, makes you feel foolish and safe at once. You stayed, he says. You watched, and now you'll remember. There's no threat in it, only certainty. You understand. This night will cling to you forever. You'll never see a dolphin without recalling the panic in those human eyes. Never taste wine without smelling sea spray. Never hear laughter without wondering if a god is hiding behind it. The glow around him dims slowly, his form softening until he seems again like a man, just a youth with grape-dark hair, leaning lazily against the mast. But you know better. The mask may be back on, but the truth has already burned itself into you. The waves tap gently against the hull, a steady heartbeat of the sea. Dionysus, now calm again, leans on the mast like nothing extraordinary just happened. But for you, the air still crackles with what you've witnessed. Men leaping, bodies twisting, a god's power made visible. You find yourself asking the question humans always ask after mythic chaos. What was the point? The Greeks rarely told stories just for spectacle. Myths were moral lessons wrapped in drama, and this one is no exception. The moral feels clear enough. Treat strangers with respect, because the person you try to exploit might actually be a god in disguise. Hospitality, the sacred duty of Xenia, was a cornerstone of Greek society. It bound guest and host in mutual obligation. Fail at it, and the gods might turn you into a fish. You laugh under your breath. That's the mainstream fact. Xenia wasn't just politeness. It was law enforced by Zeus himself. Every traveler might be divine. You never knew when you were serving soup to a king of Olympus. Imagine that pressure the next time someone rings your doorbell. But the quirky tidbit. This myth flips the usual guest host script. Normally, it's the host who risks failing, turning away a beggar or refusing shelter. Here, it's the sailors as hosts of the sea who fail, scheming to profit from their passenger. The punishment comes not on land but on water, showing that even at sea, where Poseidon reigns, Dionysus could flex his divine authority. Historians still argue whether the dolphin punishment was meant to be eternal. Were those sailors doomed to swim as dolphins forever? Or was the transformation just temporary, a shock lesson before they were allowed back to shore? Some scholars think the myth explains why dolphins are unusually friendly to humans, as if they retain scraps of memory, echoes of voices, a lingering need to reconnect with their old kind. You lean on the railing, watching the horizon. The moral of the story doesn't hit you with a hammer. It settles softly, like sand drifting to the sea floor. Don't exploit strangers. Don't assume weakness makes someone easy prey. And don't think you can tie up a youth with laughing eyes and get away with it. You smile despite yourself. Part of you wants to argue the lesson isn't so much be kind, as don't mess with Dionysus specifically. Other gods might forgive. Dionysus prefers drama. He makes sure your downfall has style, and in a strange way that's comforting. You imagine him as a cosmic theatre director, staging morality plays where the actors learn the hard way. The lions, the wine, the dolphins, it's a production designed to leave an impression, even if the audience is just you, standing sleepless on a myth-soaked deck. The ship creaks. The vines sigh, and you exhale, letting the moral sink in with the night air. The night drifts on, and your thoughts slide from the ship's creaking deck into the echo of something larger. Myths never stayed trapped on parchment. They bled into rituals, festivals, and everyday life. And when it comes to Dionysus, his stories weren't just bedtime fables. They were living theatre. Imagine Athens at the height of spring. The city hums with anticipation, not for war, not for politics, but for a festival, the Great Dionysia. Crowds stream toward the theatre carved into the hillside below the Acropolis. Farmers, sailors, aristocrats, even slaves gather together, shoulder to shoulder, to watch plays unfold under the god's protection. You picture yourself there, still smelling of sea salt from the myth you just witnessed, now brushing dust from your cloak as you squeeze onto a stone bench. The mainstream fact: the festival was central to Greek identity. It wasn't just entertainment, it was civic duty, a ritual offering to Dionysus. Comedies, tragedies, satyr plays, all born from this tradition. Scholars trace theatre itself back to Dionysian worship, where ecstatic chants and dances slowly evolved into scripted drama. The god of wine also became the god of storytelling, which explains why his myths always feel staged with flair. And here's a quirky tidbit. During some festivals, participants wore masks not just in the theatre but in street processions. Imagine thousands of Athenians in papier-mâché faces, parading with phallic symbols the size of lampposts, all in honor of the god who blurred boundaries. It wasn't just performance, it was catharsis. The whole city became one big stage where rules relaxed, wine flowed, and the line between sacred and silly blurred. Historians still debate whether the dolphin myth itself was reenacted at these festivals. Some say it was acted as a satyr play, with actors leaping into the orchestra pit, flapping arms to mimic dolphins, the audience roaring with laughter at the ridiculousness. Others argue it was too niche, that the story lived mostly in art and poetry rather than performance. But the idea lingers. Maybe somewhere, on a warm Athenian evening, an actor pretended to sprout fins while Dionysus reclined nearby in painted splendor. You lean into the thought of it, people laughing, crying, nodding at the lesson while also enjoying the absurdity. Wine passed down the rows, sticky and sweet. Children tugged at parents' sleeves, pointing when the lion roared on stage. The play might end with actors bouncing around in dolphin masks, squeaking in chorus while the audience giggled. Back on the ship, you realize what you've just seen wasn't just a myth, but a performance itself. Dionysus staged the sailors' downfall as a piece of immersive theatre, with you as witness, maybe even as unwilling extra. The vines, the beasts, the transformation, all of it feels like the earliest form of a festival play. A warning, yes, but also a spectacle meant to be retold, reshaped, and laughed about centuries later. You grin in the dim light, the connection settling in your bones. Tonight, you've drifted straight from a myth into a theatre seat, then back again to the rolling waves. All of it, one long performance in Dionysus's honor. The ship rocks gently, but your mind rocks harder, circling questions with no easy answer. You've watched men turn to dolphins, vines sprout from nowhere, beasts roar into being, and a god peel back his disguise. Yet even here, lulled by the sea, you can't help wondering, what did the ancient storytellers mean by it all? Historians still debate, of course, they always do. Some argue the tale of Dionysus and the sailors was never meant as literal truth. To them it was allegory, a parable about greed and the sanctity of hospitality. The sailors, in this reading, symbolize humanity's arrogance, and the dolphins are walking caution signs, cross the god of wine, and your legacy is a squeaky mammal. Others counter that the myth might encode ritual memory. Picture early Dionysian worshippers staging mock voyages during festivals. They may have sung hymns about sailors punished for disbelief, each refrain a reminder that rejecting the god meant losing your human voice. Some even suggest processions to the sea, where initiates waded into waves, mimicking the leap into transformation. A third school insists it's seafarers' superstition, pure and simple. Sailors are notoriously superstitious, touchy about omens, curses, and divine protection. Dolphins were often spotted trailing ships, and maybe one imaginative crew decided they must be transformed men. The story spread like spilled wine, growing grander with each retelling until lions, bears, and vines got added for dramatic flavor. And here's the quirky tidbit. In a few obscure versions, Dionysus doesn't punish the sailors at all. Instead, he rewards them, turning them into dolphins so they'll forever rescue drowning men. That flips the script entirely. Instead of a curse, the transformation becomes a cosmic job promotion. Congratulations, you're now part of the Maritime Safety Patrol. The mainstream fact is that myths like this one were never frozen. They shifted with region, time, and audience. A vase painter in Corinth might depict one detail. A poet in Athens might emphasize another. The sailor's fate could be tragic, comic, or oddly merciful, depending on who told the story and why. You lean against the railing, hearing the debate echo in your head like distant arguments at a symposium. Was it allegory, ritual, superstition? Maybe all three, or maybe none. The myth resists being caged, just as Dionysus himself resists definition. God of wine and madness, order and chaos, punishment and joy. And the longer you think, the more you realize that uncertainty is part of the point. Dionysus thrives in ambiguity. He's the god who blurs lines, who demands you sit with paradox until it starts to feel comfortable. The dolphins leap again in your imagination, each arc a question mark across the waves. You don't need an answer tonight. You just need the rhythm of the debate, rocking you like the ship beneath your feet. The sea has grown calmer, as though it too wants to eavesdrop on your spiraling thoughts. You pace the deck slowly, the boards beneath your sandals warm from the lingering sun, and you let yourself drift further into comparison. Myths, after all, rarely stand alone. They echo and rhyme across cultures. You think of the dolphins again, those talkative swimmers who once were men. Strangely, many cultures assign dolphins a role as messengers or guides. The Greeks weren't alone in seeing them as special. In fact, Roman mosaics often showed dolphins carrying souls to the afterlife, a kind of sleek aquatic taxi service. Historians still argue whether this imagery was meant literally or just artistically symbolic, but the pattern is undeniable. Here's your mainstream fact. In Delphi, the very heart of Greek prophecy, the name itself may link back to Delphin, the Greek word for dolphin. Apollo, another god entirely, was said to have taken dolphin form when guiding sailors. So dolphins weren't just side characters, they were woven deeply into the divine landscape. And then the quirky tidbit. Some medieval bestiaries later insisted dolphins had a soft spot for music. Supposedly, they would leap from the sea if a harp or flute was played from a ship's deck. Imagine a medieval minstrel strumming away and hoping for free dolphin choreography. That's the kind of detail that feels like it wandered in from a fever dream, but it stuck around in manuscripts nonetheless. You find yourself laughing softly, half at the image of dancing dolphins, half at the human tendency to project stories onto animals. You realize myths aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors. People saw dolphins trailing their ships and thought, surely they must have a reason. Surely they're connected to us. The myth of Dionysus and the sailors is one attempt at answering that curiosity. It makes you wonder about how other cultures explain similar mysteries. Polynesian traditions told of sea creatures guiding navigators across vast distances. Norse sagas spoke of gods disguising themselves as animals to test mortals. Even in Native American lore, you find echoes of tricksters turning humans into creatures as punishment or as teaching moments. Historians still argue whether these parallels reflect genuine cultural exchange or just the universal human habit of myth-making. Either way, they stitch together a tapestry of stories that make the world feel less random, more connected. And as your thoughts wander further, you picture the sailors turned dolphins not as victims, not even as punishments, but as a bridge between man and nature, between hubris and humility, between the known and the unknown. That bridge is fragile, like the line between dream and waking, but it's exactly where Dionysus thrives. The ship sighs under you, timbers settling, as though agreeing with your conclusion. Somewhere in the distance, a real dolphin breaks the surface with a splash. You smile, almost expecting it to wink or speak, carrying the faintest whisper of an ancient myth that refuses to stay buried. The night air has cooled further, brushing against your skin like a silk veil, and the sea's constant rhythm has become the lullaby you didn't know you needed. You lean against the railing, gazing into the horizon, and let yourself settle into the final lingering strands of this strange tale of Dionysus and the talking dolphins. You've walked through vineyards that seemed to sprout in an instant, through storms that became symphonies of panthers and ivy, through punishments that transformed men into sleek swimmers forever bound to the waves. And here, at the edge of the story, you find yourself asking not only what it all meant to the Greeks, but what it means to you right now. The mainstream fact here is simple. Dionysus was not just a god of wine. He represented transformation itself, ecstatic, frightening, and oddly liberating. To ancient Greeks, his myths weren't random anecdotes, they were warnings and comforts about how unstable life could be. One moment you're steering a ship. The next, you're leaping joyfully through waves with a dorsal fin. Then comes the quirky tidbit. In some late retellings, sailors supposedly thanked Dionysus afterward. The idea was that living as dolphins gave them freedom they never knew on land. You almost picture them gossiping in squeaky dolphin voices, swapping old sea shanties, happy to have shed the burdens of debt and discipline. It's a surprisingly optimistic ending for a tale that began with betrayal. Historians still argue whether this myth was originally a cult story used during Dionysian rites, or just a sailor's yarn embroidered over time. The line between sacred ritual and seaport storytelling was thin after all. Maybe priests in masks once acted it out by firelight, or maybe an old fisherman spun it one too many times while drunk on diluted wine. As you rest in this uncertainty, you realize that ambiguity itself is part of the charm. Myths rarely close neatly. They dissolve into questions, leaving you drifting in thought, much like your ship on this vast quiet ocean. The creak of wood, the splash of distant waves, the occasional cry of a gull. These sounds weave around you like a soft cocoon. You let your breathing match the tide, slow in, slow out. The story is almost done, but not quite. Like dolphins surfacing and diving again, it lingers a little longer, inviting you to drift with it. Now, let the final words stretch gently. Like a yawn, the ship becomes lighter, the stars above more blurred. You are free to let go of the edges of history, of questions, of comparisons. Imagine the dolphins circling below, watching you with knowing eyes, not asking for belief, only offering company. They chatter softly, a lull of squeaks and clicks, a reminder that transformation can be soothing, not frightening. The waves cradle you. The god drifts back into shadow. The myth becomes simply water, endless and calm. And now, the wind down begins. You're resting more deeply now. Eyes heavy, shoulders softened. The story has slowed, its edges dissolving, like sand pulled gently by the tide. Each breath in is longer, each breath out softer, until even the sound of your own breathing feels like part of the sea itself. You let your imagination drift to a horizon with no sharp lines, only a blending of ocean and sky. The dolphins fade into silhouettes, swimming peacefully, not calling for your attention anymore. Dionysus, too, steps back into the folds of myth, leaving you with the calm of quiet waves. Every sound grows slower, like the hush of a fan at your bedside, or the faint hum of night air through an open window. Your body feels supported, as though the deck beneath your feet has become a hammock, swaying you to sleep. There is nothing more to follow, nothing to solve, only rest, only the assurance that, like all old stories, this one will wait patiently for you, ready to be retold whenever you wish. Let yourself sink into the calm. Let the sea close softly around you, gentle, endless, forgiving. Good night.